Just let me know when you're ready.
Oh, I'm ready.
Good morning, Josey Baker. Welcome on VH Berries.
Good morning, Victor. Thanks for having me, man. How are you doing?
I'm very inspired by your work and I'm very grateful. How about you?
Oh, that's so sweet to hear. Yeah, I'm doing pretty well today. Yeah, all things considered.
To make a little introduction, you're the co-owner of The Mill, which is a bakery and also a coffee that is located very close to the Alamo Square Park.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, we're a cafe and bakery that I run in collaboration with Four Barrel Coffee, and we've been here for about 8.5 years. Yeah.
And what I find very funny, Josey, about this park that is located just next to your bakery is that there is the infinite sign that is on the park. If you see the park on a satellite view, and there is also a connection with you because the infinite sign is also something that is important for you.
Wow, cool connection and question. I was not prepared for that. I love this. Wow. Yeah, actually, come to think of it, I'll show you right now. Let's see here. There you go. Yeah, so that is the first tattoo I ever got, and it's a design of my own creation. And it is, everything equals infinity equals everything. But as you can see, the infinity symbol is broken up into parts because that's what us humans have to do in order to understand anything. And also, this equal sign has a dot, which is half of a division sign, and this one has a dot on the other side. So it's, the relativity of truth and humans' quest for and limitations in understanding.
You just mentioned it. We are all in the quest to understand what is around us. And something that you've questioned and that you are mastering today is to make bread.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I mean, I definitely don't feel like I have mastered it by any stretch. And I think that's one of the things that I perpetually love about bread baking is that, it's an opportunity to be reminded every time of, of the ways that we're capable of creating beauty and nourishment, and understanding and exploring and creating. And also, there is this side of it that is mysterious and is unknown and is endlessly beautiful and fascinating, and which kind of keeps me, and I think lots of people who fall in love with bread baking, keeps us interested and intrigued by it and with it. And every time I make bread, I learn something. I learn something about bread, and I learn something about myself, and it's not always the easiest thing to confront or to learn, but I do welcome the opportunity for growth. Most of the time I welcome it. Sometimes I resist it. But what can you do?
What can we do? Nothing. And I would love to retrace the journey of your life because you don't want to call yourself a master in bread because it started only a few years ago. So you want to keep working hard.
Yeah. I mean, I first baked bread about 11 years ago. Now, a little over 11 years ago, but I started baking bread at home, in a little mission apartment where I lived with some friends, and a childhood buddy was traveling through San Francisco, and he had some sourdough starter, and he gifted it to me and scribbled down some instructions, and I was pretty immediately in love with the process. I'd been already in love with the product of bread baking, which is a loaf of bread. But I loved how, how tangible it was, that, you could take these substances and combine them, and through some combination of art and science create, this food that has played such a pivotal role in human civilization, which I feel a connection to each time I engage in the process of bread making. And I also immediately recognized and, felt in a profound way how bread connects us to other people, and in those early days of baking, and even now, the act of making bread with other people is one of the most enjoyable things that I do in my life, but also the act of sharing the baked bread with people is, it's just so basic and simple and fundamental, and it is so basically and simply and fundamentally fulfilling. And I love it. It definitely still got me after all these years.
Josey Baker, you just mentioned the fact that it all started at home, doing bread at home. And this is fascinating because everybody, I guess, last year during the pandemic, for example, when a lot of cities were in lockdown, everybody started making their own bread because they couldn't go outside to get a baguette.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible to see the way that people fell in love with the process of bread making, and I thought it was incredible. Obviously through an incredibly challenging and tragic past year and a half on all sorts of levels, for there to be this movement towards a practice that is so beautiful in all of the ways I've just discussed. I think that is definitely a net positive for all of those people, for all of us, really. And it was really a joy to be able to serve as a a source of inspiration and technique and recipes throughout that time. And here in the bakery, we've always given away our we've always had starter available to customers who come in for ask for it. What we typically do, and what we do now, is we ask for customers to trade us something for the starter, and we're not picky or choosy about what. We just ask that they give us something as a barter starter, as it's called. And this nice fellow gave us this hand carved. He called it a spoon. It seems like kind of more of a spatula, but it's, I am not the creator of this art. So we got this thing as well. Make a little birdhouse in your soul, not to put too fine a point on it. Say I'm the only bee in your bonnet. We gave away thousands of them. Thousands of little lumps of sourdough starter. And I just love the thought that, now across San Francisco, and I'm sure it's traveled far and wide, that we now have those connections with all of those people and all of those loaves of bread. And, it's a vast and intricate web that really has bread as the connective tissue between us all. So there goes bread again, being so beautiful.
I am not really familiar with this concept of starter. What is it exactly?
Oh, okay. Yes. So sourdough, right? Which is sourdough is all that means is it's a blend of wild yeast as opposed to commercially made yeast, like yeast that you can go to a store and buy in a little packet. So there's wild yeast, which is the yeast that's present in the environment. And there's lots of different strains of it. But in your sourdough starter, it's a mixture of flour and water with wild yeast and bacteria. And so the wild yeast and bacteria live in harmony in the mixture of flour and water. And the way that you maintain or keep your sourdough starter healthy is just by continuing to feed it flour and water. And that provides food for the yeast and bacteria, right? So you can keep it going. It's like a little, you have a little zoo going of yeast and bacteria. We keep ours in just a little, quart container. And every day we feed ours twice a day. And what we mean by feed is we just take most of it and compost it or use it for bread making and then put in more flour and water. And so we just do that day in and day out and keep the yeast and bacteria populations thriving and in balance. And so the process of, gifting someone a sourdough starter, sharing a sourdough starter, is you just give them a little piece. It can be as big or as little as you want, but a piece of the flour and water, which has some of the wild yeast and bacteria present in it. And then with that small piece, you can make endless quantities of bread, because when you feed that sourdough starter flour and water, the wild yeast and the bacteria thrive and multiply. And so, we have just a very small, it's like about a cup of sourdough starter that we keep in the bakery. And from that cup, every day we make, 500 plus loaves of bread through the act of feeding it and, allowing it the time to multiply and expand. And the art of sourdough bread making is really the practice of managing those populations of yeast and bacteria at various steps in the process that can yield, if everything goes right, the desired characteristics in the finished loaf of bread. Because the difference between sourdough bread and commercially yeasted bread is that the yeast strain is different, but it mostly has to do with the presence of all that bacteria, which in commercially yeasted bread, there's very small populations of bacteria. But so sourdough, which our breads are not very sour tasting. We strive for a balance of flavors, but the sourness is due to the production of various acids by the bacteria, right? So the wild yeast also produces some acids in smaller amounts, but the yeast primarily produces carbon dioxide, which is responsible for the leavening process of the bread, right? The rising of the bread.
I really appreciated this scientific explanation. And Josey Baker, something that I have to admit, and this is something that I am trying to copy from you, is that you are keeping the focus on only one thing, the meal. You are not trying to open 20 more bakery, but instead put all your love and attention, passion into your team to create a great environment.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Victor. Victor, I got to ask you a question now, pal. How did you decide to interview me? Because I've seen the other people you interviewed, and you interview people who, have had a profound impact on the world. And I'm just a fellow in a bakery in San Francisco. What made you decide to want to speak with me?
Because I'm French. The baguette is part of my life.
Victor, I hate to break it to you, but we actually don't make baguettes.
But it's kind of the same, because we have a type of bread that is named like countryside bread, which is also round. So for me, this is almost the same. I don't see any difference.
Yeah, no. I mean, the truth is, a lot of our breads, they have their origins in the French bread tradition of so point taken. But I'm honored and humbled and flattered to be included in your project. But so yeah, to get to your question, I appreciate you acknowledging that, or praising me for that. I mean, I have to say, over the years, it's definitely been something that has it's been surprisingly challenging to keep my priorities straight. And that's not to say I'm not extremely grateful for the opportunities that I've been given and this success we've had with this bakery. And so, even being in a position where I, could contemplate doing something in addition to this is something that I don't take lightly. And I know that, is a result of a complex network of my privilege and good luck. And all that being said, I think now more than ever before, I'm actually clearer that I want to just focus on the things in my immediate surrounding, and I'm not really interested in trying to start something newer or bigger than this, which it's a combination of things, but mostly like I feel like it's important to me to have deep connections with the people that I work with, and we're a team of 11 people, and I care deeply about everybody on my team, and I don't call me limited, but I don't feel like I really have the emotional or mental capacity to like care for that many more people on my team. And I definitely have I walked right up to the possibility of opening another location and doing a handful of other projects over the years. And I mean, hindsight's 2020, but each of those projects, I did not make the leap to get them started. And each time that happened, there was this like deep sense of relief that I hadn't committed myself to another project, another large group of people within my professional world that I'm not totally sure that I would have been able to be the type of leader and colleague that I want to be. And when it comes down to it, I do, for the most part, I really love my day-to-day professional life, I really love to have the types of connections that I do with my team, and with our farmers and our miller and the markets that we work with and the chefs that we work with and the customers who, walk in here every day. And I feel like I have like a relative balance in my life. That's just talking about the professional side of my life. I'm also a father and a husband and a friend, and I think having my son enter our life was the biggest shift in my priorities. Kind of realizing the amount of time and energy that it takes to be the type of father that I want to be. And, it kind of became clear to me at a certain point a few years ago that I was not limitless in my capacity, and that there are certain situations where like you have to make a choice, where I had to make a choice. Like, am I going to put my time and energy into my career, or am I going to put my time and energy into my son, into my family, into my home? And I try to have, an approximate balance in those things. And for me, for right now, and as far as I can see into the, immediate and not so distant future, that means having a single location and a single group of staff, and then also having a rich home life outside of work life. So, I think that I started out by saying I appreciate you, praising me for that, because I do think that there were years where I was confused about those priorities. And in part I was confused about it because I think the assumption within our culture is that the focus should be, at least like in your professional life or in entrepreneurship, that the focus, should be on growing. If you have one successful business, you should have another successful business. If you have two successful businesses, maybe you should have 5 successful, right? So on and so forth. And I mean, I just, the compromises that would be required in order to achieve that level of success, I think would lead to me being a total failure in the rest of my life. And possibly in the professional ventures as well. So, yeah, I'm just trying to enjoy my little piece of the pie.
And when you are mentioning this balance and the 11 people working in the mill, in the bakery part, and your son, I am thinking of a superhero movie.
That's awesome. You calling me a superhero, Victor?
You are a superhero in a certain way, because your impact, as you mentioned before, might not be global around the world, but it definitely is local in San Francisco.
Yeah. And I, I think a younger me, and part of the current me, has, I'm activated by the possibility of having a larger impact, and I think some of that is healthy, right? It's like, yeah, to be able to like be part of larger impact outside of my immediate surroundings and my immediate community. That sounds nice. That sounds like perhaps a positive thing. But I think part of that is maybe unhealthy, or maybe not unhealthy, but not something that I really want to encourage in myself, which is, more of like an ego drive that, I don't think ego is necessarily evil. But it can definitely lead us. It has and can lead me to do things that, in hindsight, I don't think like is really my highest calling. And so, I'm definitely not ruling out engaging myself in projects that have, larger impact. And I'm also, for me, right now where I am definitely focused more on, the people in the communities that I have direct relationships with in my everyday life.
In definitive, the key is to say no, except when it comes to the VH Berries podcast.
You nailed it. You nailed it, Victor. Yeah, no, saying no is something that I really struggle with. And I think that it's been much harder and led to more problems than I would have really ever could have guessed, in like over the last 10 years of this career. To oversimplify, like I'm a yes man, and it's feels great to be able to do that. And the reality is like, I sometimes overcommit to things, and then I can't actually follow through. And that is disappointing for everybody involved. And so, but Victor, a joy to make time to chat with you here today. So thanks again for including me.
Right now, for me, in Montreal, this is 3 p.m. And today I have ate nothing but cookies and milk. So to give us some appetite, tell us about the bread that you are making at the mill.
Victor, you've only eaten cookies and milk so far today? It's 3:00?
Absolutely. I know this is very bad.
You're very cool. You're very cool, man. God, I'll tell my kid that. He will really be pissed at me that I don't let him do that. Yeah, so, I mean, oh God, you're inspiring me. More pleasure, more everyday pleasure. So yeah, but what we do is I've got a whole grain sourdough bread bakery. So we make, all of our breads are, made with mostly whole grain flour. Up until a week ago, all of that flour was freshly milled in-house, but unfortunately our stone mill, it had a failure of one of the critical components, so it's out of line right now. But, the reality is when we opened the bakery, 8.5 years ago, I really didn't have access to the kind of flour, that I was interested in using, which was, grown locally, grown organically, and, milled fresh, on a stone mill. And not only that, but, could be used to make the bread with the kind of characteristics that I was interested in. But a lot has changed over the last 8.5 years. And now, we do have access to really, really high quality, delicious, locally grown, freshly milled flour. And so, for right now, that's what we're using, stuff that we don't mill ourselves. And, I think we've all been really pleased with the breads that we're able to make with it. So that's been really, it's been an interesting and sort of quick evolution of thinking and approach, to go from being a bakery in which, one of the central tenets of our work is, that we mill all the whole grain flour ourselves, to saying, what's it like if we don't do that? right now. Not really because it's a choice, but because we have to. And, we're obviously going to go back to milling whole grain flour ourselves in house. But, I think the question kind of remains for me of like, which grains we're going to do that with and why, and, which flours we're going to work with, local high quality mills in order to source our flour from. Is the way that, well, most bakeries don't use whole grain flour, but, if you do use whole grain flour, almost all of them don't mill it themselves. You obviously can make incredibly high quality bread with flour that you don't mill yourself. In fact, it's much easier to do it with flour that you don't mill yourself, but, it's a matter of what your priorities are in the process, and I think there's a lot to be said for, from a creative and artistic perspective, just kind of wanting to have, connection with, engagement and control over that phase of the process. But it's not something that I feel right now is essential for us to, do that 100% ourselves in-house. Anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent. We make delicious fresh milled whole grain sourdough bread here in the heart of San Francisco. A modern take on San Francisco to sourdough. No, but a lot of our breads are, all of our breads are baked, the morning of. And so if you walk into the bakery, you can smell the bread from down the block, but you walk in and, the bread that's on the shelf as you walk in, it's all come out of the oven, at most a couple hours, but, often, a matter of minutes before. And that has a lot to do with I think why we have such a loyal customer base. And also we're able to do that because the people who are on the team, they really carry genuine, authentic love and dedication to the craft. And, it is very much a communal team effort, every moment of every day. And, I'm very proud to say that the culture and the energy of my team, is something that I'm really proud of. And it's something that's really, I'd say that like sensitivity, care, communication, and respect are some of the things that run deep, both when it comes to working with each other, but also, with the bread itself. And, I think you see a picture of the bread and it looks like a pretty loaf of bread. But I think that when you eat the bread, I think there is something of the intangible that is conveyed in the object. And, I'd like to think that that's part of what makes our bread special.
And Josey Baker, in this very special craft, we can always see, whatever you are doing, the influence of nature and the Alamo Square Park, because you are trying to implement some texture, some pattern, for example, zebra colors inside the bread.
Yeah, we're always trying to find a balance of like in and out of control of, of art and science, of, tame and wild. And, in order to do that well, you do have to sort of you're walking a fine line. And, I think the margin of error shrinks as you get closer to that balance. And, because, for instance, like to get really specific, like something that I'm always fascinated with, which practically speaking to our customers and the eating quality of the bread is basically meaningless, but it is something that from an aesthetic and artistic perspective is something that I find intriguing and I find unique, which is, when slashing the loaf of bread, the depth and the angle of the blade. So in the moments before the loaf of bread goes into the oven, so it's still dough, right? And it's about to go into the oven to start its journey of becoming bread. We take a razor and we slash the top of the loaf, in a quick and decisive movement, and very subtle differences in the angle of the blade and the depth of the blade, they have an impact on what happens as the bread expands in the oven. Well, and what I love is when it's the most difficult way of doing it, but I think it yields the most beautiful results. So like, if this is the top of the loaf of bread, see if I had something I could use. So if this is the top of the loaf of bread, and we'll say this is the razor, what I like to do is have there be, it's like a pretty shallow angle, right? So you see, as opposed to this, right? Like this, and you slash it like this, right? As opposed to like this. And to not go very deep, right? Maybe like between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch in depth. Or it'd be much easier to hold it like this and just drag it along the top of the loaf, 1/2 inch, 1 inch. You would make a deep cut in the loaf and that would be fine. But by doing it at this angle like this and trying to go pretty shallow, what ends up happening is you create a very thin piece of the loaf that you've actually cut, right? And it's a kind of like a little flap like this, as opposed to being like a crevice like this. And then so as the loaf expands like this, you end up with this very narrow and delicate and perhaps even like wildly patterned ridge that just the tip of it gets burned. And I find that to be just the most beautiful slash possible on the top of a loaf, in part because I know what it takes in order to create that, which is, in that moment, you have to have the blade at exactly the right angle, and you have to be able to cut at the exact right depth, and there has to be zero hesitation in it. Because if you hesitate at all, the blade will get stuck, or you won't cut the loaf. And so when I see that, it just like screams out to me that, the way I see it is like, oh my, this is so beautiful. This loaf has been like given the opportunity to fulfill its potential by the baker who ushered it from loaf into bread. And it's hard to do. It doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen when I bake or when anybody bakes, but it is one of those small details that to me embodies this balance of like you're just on this side of being out of control, right? You're really walking the line there. And I'm very fascinated with that space.
In definitive, with these small details on bread, this is art. Thank you so much, Josey Baker, from the intimacy of the back of your bakery in your hood house.
Victor, I really, really enjoyed this conversation, man, and I'm so honored that you wanted to spend some time talking with me about this, and I really appreciate the ways you took our conversation. So, thank you for including me and for doing this project and bringing these ideas out to people. Really, really honored.